They pulled him out of retirement on a Tuesday, which Callum Drake had always considered the worst possible day for anything important. He was drinking cold tea in what passed for a kitchen. 3 exposed pipes, a camp stove, and a folding chair, when the signal came through on the relay hidden inside the pillar box at the end of the alley. 2 long pulses, 1 short, the old frequency, the one he'd told them he was done with. He set the mug down, looked at it for a moment, looked at the alley beyond the cracked window, where the Vreth patrol drone buzzed its slow patrol route, its amber eyes sweeping left and right, mechanically bored. He counted 3 seconds between sweeps, same as yesterday, same as the week before. The Vreth were meticulous. They were also, in their meticulous way, deeply predictable. He picked the mug back up, finished the tea. Then he went to answer the signal. The headquarters of what remained of Earth's Central Intelligence Division sat beneath a shuttered curry house on the corner of Baker Street and a road that no longer had a sign. The Vreth had taken down all the signs in the first month of occupation. Their behavioral analysts had determined that human beings derived comfort from named streets, and comfort was an obstacle to efficient subjugation. So the signs came down, the streets became corridors, London became a grid. Drake had always found this slightly amusing. He'd worked in the dark for 30 years. Removing the signs just made the rest of the city feel more like home. He dropped through the floor hatch, slid the magnetic seal behind him, and descended into the low blue light of the operations room. It smelled of damp concrete, overheated electronics, and the particular nervous sweet aura of Ernest Huxley, who was sitting at the communications desk eating a biscuit and looking like a man who very much wished he was somewhere else. Ernest was 43, broad-shouldered in the way that suggested his body had expected more exercise than his personality had ever allowed, and wore a permanent expression of mild catastrophic anticipation. He was the best comms and analysis officer Drake had ever worked with, and he spent approximately 60% of his working hours hoping nothing would be asked of him. "Morning," Drake said. "It's evening," Ernest said. "Is it?" "Gonson, I've been trying to raise you for 4 hours." Ernest paused, adjusted his headset. "I made tea. It's gone cold." "Mine too." Drake pulled up a chair and looked at the screens. 3 of them showed Vreth movement data. Troop logistics, patrol sweeps, the slow arterial flows of an occupying army moving through a city it owned. The 4th screen showed something different, something that made Drake go still. "Colonel's been on twice," Ernest said. Well, you know how he is. Tell me what I'm looking at." Ernest cleared his throat, pulled up the briefing overlay. "Right, well, Silas Wren." The name landed in the room like a dropped stone. Baron Silas Wren was not the supreme commander of the Vreth occupation. That distinction belonged to a council of 9, cold and distant as orbital platforms. But he was its architect, the mind behind the campaign. When humans thought of the occupation, they thought of the drones, the cordons, the systematic dismantling of everything that had made Earth feel like theirs. Wren had designed all of it. He was a genius in the way that a flood is a genius. Total, impersonal, and absolutely uninterested in what you thought about it. He was also, by every account, approximately the size and shape of a very large toad. Drake had seen footage. The resemblance was uncanny. He'd mentioned this once to a Vreth translator and had nearly lost the use of his left arm. "Vren's launched something new," Ernest said. He tapped the screen. 4 operations, sequential. We think they're designed to be, well, the analysis team used the word cascading. Each one's bad, but together they're extinction tier. Ernest winced. "I was going to say quite problematic, but yes, that." Drake leaned forward. "Walk me through them." Ernest took a breath. The kind of breath that said, "I would like a biscuit and a lie down, but instead I will do this." Operation 1. They're calling it the Brood Initiative. Vren's biological division has been developing an accelerated growth species, something engineered, big, aggressive. They're breeding thousands of them in the old agricultural zones, north of what used to be Edinburgh. When they release them, the feeding pattern will strip the remaining food supply in the lowlands within 6 weeks. "What kind of creature?" Ernest hesitated. "They appear to be, and I want to stress that I'm reading this from intercepts, not from personal observation, very large chickens." Drake stared at him, genetically modified, each one massing around 200 kilograms. Herding instinct amplified, territorial response maximized, feeding drive essentially unlimited. They would move like a single organism and... Ernest trailed off. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like the thing that's going to end the human food supply is an enormous chicken. Several thousand enormous chickens. Technically." Drake was quiet for a moment. "What's the second operation?" Ernest consulted his screen. The Dream Engine. Vreth Psychological Warfare Division. They've built a broadcast array. We think it's buried under the old Parliament site. When it activates, it transmits a targeted neurostimulation signal. Range covers most of Western Europe. It doesn't kill. It just, he searched for the word, unmoors. People lose the ability to distinguish between memory and reality. You'd be conscious, walking, breathing, but you'd be living inside your own head, completely unreachable. How long before activation? The intercept suggests 72 hours, possibly less. Third operation. Vren has a fleet of stealth transports operating under a new cloaking configuration. We don't fully understand the physics yet, but they're moving things. Large things. The tracking data shows displacement events, massive objects disappearing from one location and reappearing in another. Ernest pulled up a map. We think he's relocating infrastructure. Factories, power generation, logistics hubs, moving them into positions that make Earth's remaining resistance corridors indefensible. After that, any organized response becomes impossible, geometrically so, yes. Drake rubbed the bridge of his nose, and the fourth? Ernest was quiet for a beat longer than the others. Penfold, he said. Drake looked up. Ernest's expression had changed. The bureaucratic anxiety was still there, but underneath it was something simpler and older, fear. His name is Ernest Penfold, Ernest said. He's my cousin. Second cousin. He was working a relay station in the Northern Network. 3 weeks ago, the station went dark. We traced it. The Vreth have him. He paused. Vren has him. He's using him as, I think the operational term is leverage. If we attempt to disrupt any of the first 3 operations, Penfold's location beacon activates. And he stopped. He's set it up so that any counter-operation we run puts Penfold at risk. The analysis team called it an elegant coercion architecture. Your cousin, Drake said. He's terrified of spiders, Ernest said, as if this were relevant. And quite fond of biscuits. And he stopped, steadied himself. He's the kind of person who stays. Even when everything is wrong, he just stays. Drake looked at the 4 screens for a long time. The patrol drone outside still ran its 3-second sweep. Somewhere above them, a dead city breathed its shallow breath. 4 tasks, Drake said quietly. Vren's given us 4 tasks and made it so we can't complete any of them without risking the others. Yes, he thinks that's checkmate. Ernest said nothing. Drake stood up. He reached for his jacket. White, battered. The collar turned up against a cold that hadn't left his bones since the occupation began, and shrugged it on. He checked the small device on his wrist, checked the frequency relay clipped to his collar. Then he picked up Ernest's cold mug of tea, took a sip, set it back down. Right, he said. I'll need your eyes on comms the whole time. Don't leave the desk. Don't go quiet on me. Ernest stared at him. You're going now, alone, to stop 4 separate extinction tier operations. 4 tasks, Drake said. Let's call them tasks. Sounds more manageable. It doesn't actually, Drake smiled. It was a small smile, the kind built from long practice rather than amusement, and it didn't reach his eye. The left one was covered by a patch, legacy of a Vreth boarding action 18 months ago. But the right one held something that Ernest had never quite been able to name. Not recklessness, not bravado, something quieter. Something that looked, improbably, like the decision had already been made, and the rest was just details. Keep the kettle on, Drake said, and climbed back up through the hatch. The Vreth called their agricultural zones Prosperity Fields, which was the kind of name that made Drake's jaw clench. Prosperity for whom, exactly? The old farmland north of what had been Edinburgh was now a vast enclosed complex. Biodomes, temperature controls, automated feeding systems. From the air, from the Sentry drone footage, Ernest was feeding him through the earpiece. It looked like nothing so much as the world's largest, most depressing poultry farm. From the ground, crouched in the drainage channel beneath the perimeter fence, with his boots full of Scottish mud, it looked somewhat worse. You're approximately 12 meters from the outer sensor line, Ernest said in his ear. The patrol interval on foot is 4 minutes 20. You have, let me see, 3 minutes and 41 seconds. Noted. The modified animals are in the central dome. It's pressurized. If you breach the dome containment, the accelerant in their feed triggers a... Drake, this really is quite dangerous. Ernest. Yes? What does your cousin like to talk about? When he's comfortable. A pause. He talks about biscuits quite a lot, and television programs from before the occupation. Old comedies. He does impressions. They're terrible impressions. He finds them hilarious. What else? He worries, Ernest said, but he shows up, always shows up, even when. A small breath, even when he's frightened, which is almost always. Good man, Drake said and moved. He crossed the sensor line in the space between pulses, using a timing trick so old it predated the Vreth by several decades. A loop injected into the sensor feedback, borrowed from a technique Drake had learned from a man who'd learned it from someone else. The kind of knowledge that passed hand to hand in the dark, outlasting the people who first discovered it. The dome lock was biometric. Vreth biometric, meaning it read temperature fluctuations in a frequency range too narrow for human skin. Except Drake had spent a week 2 years ago reverse engineering a Vreth handheld scanner, and the device now strapped to his left wrist could mimic the fluctuation signature within acceptable parameters. He pressed it to the lock, counted to 3, the seal hissed open. He went in fast and low. The heat hit him first, then the smell. Then the sound, a low, rhythmic, deeply unsettling clucking that seemed to come from everywhere at once. His vision adjusted. He had, in his career, seen many things. He was not prepared for what he saw now. 200 of them, at minimum, visible in this section of the dome. Each one the size of a small vehicle. Feathers the color of dirty amber. Eyes like black glass marbles. Movements eerily synchronized in the way that only animals with artificially amplified herding instinct moved. They were not at this moment aggressive. They were feeding from the automated troughs that ringed the dome walls. A rhythmic, mechanical process that nonetheless carried an undertone of something vast and patient and very, very hungry. Ernest spoke in his ear. The activation system for the release protocol is at the central control node. If you can interrupt the command sequence. Already on it. Drake moved along the dome wall, keeping the modified animals in his peripheral vision, moving slowly. Not threatening, not prey. Just there, present. Unremarkable. He'd learned long ago that the trick to moving through dangerous spaces was to believe, fully, that you belonged. Animals read intention before they read shape. The control node was a Vreth standard housing, which meant it opened with the third override code he carried, and contained a command tree he'd seen the architecture of before. He worked quickly, fingers moving through the menus. Shutdown of the accelerant delivery system. Interruption of the breeding cycle. Rerouting of the climate controls to trigger a gradual atmospheric shift that would, in approximately 72 hours, render the dome uninhabitable for the modified species without harming anything native to the actual planet. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like pressing a series of buttons in a very large, very warm room full of enormous chickens. That's it, Ernest said. That's it. Operation 1 is on a clock. They won't know it's degrading until it's too late. He moved back toward the door. Time on the patrols? 20 seconds. Perfect. He was out the door and back in the drainage channel before the Vreth foot patrol crested the hill. The dream engine was harder. Not because the access was more difficult, but because the terrain was wrong. The Parliament site had been restructured under occupation. The Vreth had their own architectural language, which involved a lot of smooth surfaces and right angles, and the kind of aesthetic that said, "There is no history here. There is only now, and now belongs to us." They'd built clean over the old ruins, but stone has memory, and Drake had old maps. He went in through the river access, cold dark water, the smell of Thames mud and old iron. Ernest talked him through the maintenance corridors with the patient precision of a man who had memorized the schematics so thoroughly that he could practically see through the walls. Left. No, your left. My left is your right because I'm facing. Never mind. Left from your perspective. I know which way left is, Ernest. I'm just being thorough. The broadcast array was in what had once been a subterranean chamber beneath the old committee rooms. Now it was a Vreth installation, rows of crystalline emitters, each one tuned to the specific neurostimulation frequency. The system was elegant. Drake stood at the threshold of the chamber and took a moment to genuinely appreciate it. Not the purpose, which was monstrous, but the engineering, which was brilliant. Then he began to dismantle it. Not destroy. Destroying would trigger the failsafe and activate a partial broadcast. He needed to redirect. Luckily, the frequency range the Vreth had selected for their dream engine was extraordinarily specific. Chosen, he assumed, because it required the least tier power to achieve maximum effect in the human neurological range. But that specificity was a vulnerability. He pulled the primary tuning array from its housing, recalibrated the emitter angle by 11 degrees. Then he patched in the frequency modulator he'd carried in his jacket pocket. A small thing, handmade, cobbled from scavenged Vreth components, and a piece of preoccupation electronics so mundane he'd found it in a box at what used to be a car boot sale. "What are you doing?" Ernest asked. "The signal still goes out," Drake said. But it won't hit the human neurological band anymore. It'll hit the Vreth band instead. A silence. You're going to Dream Engine, the people operating the Dream Engine, for approximately 4 hours. Long enough for your technical team to get in here and do a proper shutdown. That's... Ernest paused. That's actually rather good. Don't sound so surprised. He activated the redirect. Somewhere above him, in the Vreth operational center running the installation, he imagined operators beginning to blink, to stare at their hands, to find themselves walking through corridors of memory that bore no relation to the smooth, right-angled world they'd built. He found he felt no particular satisfaction about this, and then found himself reconsidering. He felt a small amount of satisfaction, a controlled amount. He went back out the way he'd come, wet to the knees, and called up Ernest on the relay. 2 down, he said. How's the tracking on the stealth transports? That's, Drake. The stealth transports are currently cloaked. By definition, I can't. You said the physics isn't fully understood. Tell me what is understood. Ernest's keyboard clattered. The cloaking system creates a localized assessment event. Like, imagine a stone being skipped across water. The stone disturbs the surface even when it's in the air. If the transport is cloaked, there's no visual, no radar return, but the displacement event creates a gravitational micro-anomaly. Very small, but measurable if you know what to look for. And do you know what to look for? Longer pause. I've been running the sensor data through an algorithm I built last month. I thought it was an academic exercise. I didn't think. Keys. More keys. Drake, there's one of them directly overhead. It's been holding position for... His voice changed. It's been holding position above our operations room for 3 weeks. Drake stopped walking. They know where we are, Ernest said very quietly. But they haven't moved. No, Drake thought about it. Leverage. Same as with Penfold, they know where we are. Which means if we counter-move against the transports, they have our location on record. They can burn us down anytime they choose. He resumed walking. Where's the closest Vreth communication hub? Physical presence hub. Somewhere the Baron's logistical command is actually operating from. There's a repurposed facility in what used to be. Battersea Power Station, actually. Of course there is. Drake, I'm going to walk into it. I'm sorry? I'm going to walk into the Vreth command hub in a Battersea Power Station, Drake said. And I'm going to have a conversation with whoever's running the transport operations. And I'm going to explain to them that I've already neutralized 2 of Baron Vren's 4 operations. That I have documented proof, and that if the stealth transport program does not stand down, I will share that documentation with the other 8 members of Vren's council. The silence on the other end was extraordinary in its density. Vren, Drake continued, has been running these operations without full council authorization. I know this because the operation architecture is built around deniability. If the council knew about the Dream Engine, they'd have flagged the risk of it backfiring on Vreth operators. They didn't flag it, because they didn't know. Vren is freelancing, which means he can't protect the transport program if you go public, Ernest said slowly. Because going public is the thing he can't afford. Yes. So you're not going to break the transport program. You're going to use the information about the transport program as a lever. Ernest was quiet for a moment. That's remarkably devious. Thank you. I'm going with you. Drake stopped again. Ernest, he's my cousin, Ernest said. I know I'm not. I'm aware of what I am, Drake. I'm the person who stays at the desk. I'm the person who reads out coordinates and makes tea and worries. I'm quite good at worrying. But he's my cousin, and I'm not going to sit here while you... I'm coming with you. Drake stood in a London alley at 9 in the evening, the Vreth patrol drone humming somewhere overhead, 3-second sweep, same as always, and he thought about the particular courage it took to be the kind of person who didn't stop being afraid and went anyway. Can you still operate the comms relay on the go, he asked. I have the mobile kit, it's in my bag. I also have biscuits. Bring the biscuits. Battersea Power Station looked wrong, and right at the same time the way all repurposed things do. The 4 chimneys were intact. The Vreth had co-opted them for their own atmospheric venting systems, which meant the building was now operational in ways it hadn't been in decades, just operational for the wrong people. The outside was lit in the amber tones the Vreth preferred for their facilities, and Vreth ground troops in their smooth dark equipment moved the perimeter in patterns that were efficient and slightly hypnotic. Drake and Ernest stood at the edge of the approach road. I want to be clear, Ernest said, that I think this plan has several significant flaws. Which ones, specifically? All of them, really. The central one being that we're about to walk into a heavily fortified alien command post and essentially threaten a warlord. We're not threatening, Drake said. We're negotiating. With information he'll want to kill us to suppress. Which is why, Drake said, we've already transmitted the documentation to 3 separate dead drops that release automatically if we don't check in every 6 hours. He glanced at Ernest. I set those up while you were packing the biscuits. Ernest absorbed this. You're completely maddening, he said. You know that. I've been told. They walked in through the main entrance. Drake moved with the absolute untroubled confidence of someone who had every right to be exactly where they were, which was the only walk that ever actually worked. Beside him, Ernest moved with the absolute untroubled confidence of someone doing a very good impression of someone who had every right to be where they were, which was, Drake had found, nearly as good. The Vreth troops at the entrance watched them come. One raised a communication device. Drake kept walking. Ernest kept pace, his breathing only slightly audible. They made it to the inner hub, a vast operations room that filled what had once been the turbine hall. Screens covering walls and ceiling, Vreth operators at terminals in concentric rings, before anyone actually moved to stop them. The officer who stepped forward was tall, in the Vreth fashion, and wore the rank markings of a senior logistics coordinator. His expression conveyed the particular Vreth emotion that translated, roughly as, I am calculating whether this situation requires immediate force or a brief delay before force. Drake addressed him in Vreth, which he'd spent 8 months learning from intercepts, and a linguistic model Ernest had built in his spare time. Tell your Baron, Drake said, that his first plague has been recalled. His dream engine is broadcasting back at his own operators. His council colleagues will be very interested to learn about both. Unless he can arrange a conversation in the next 20 minutes. Also, we would like our prisoner returned. The officer stared at him. Stared at Ernest, who smiled the tentative smile of someone who had rehearsed looking calm and not quite gotten there. Then the officer turned and spoke into his communicator. They waited. Ernest ate a biscuit. He offered one to the nearest Vreth guard, who did not take it, which Ernest later described as a tragic missed opportunity for diplomatic relations. They were taken to a secondary chamber. A screen activated. On it, the face of Baron Silas Vren resolved into clarity, and Drake understood immediately why the word that kept occurring to people was toad. It wasn't the size exactly, or the color of his skin, or the way his eyes sat too wide and too flat on his face. It was the patience. The absolute, cold, geological patience of something that had been waiting a very long time and had decided the waiting was, in its own way, quite pleasant. You are the one called Drake, Vren said. His translator rendered it in flat, precise English. I am. You have caused me considerable inconvenience today. I've only just started, Drake said pleasantly. Vren was quiet for a moment. You've made threats. I've explained a situation. The difference matters. You are a single human operative. Your infrastructure is minimal. Your organization is. Your people use the word remnant, I believe. You are a remnant. Something moved in Vren's flat eyes. And you walked into my facility. Yes, why? Drake looked at him steadily. Because someone I know stays, he said. Even when he's frightened, even when everything's wrong, he just stays. I thought I should try to be worthy of that. Vren was quiet for longer this time. The patience moved in him like deep water. Your prisoner is not a useful asset, Vren said finally. He was a means to constrain your operations. If your operations are already unconstrained, return him, Drake said, and withdraw the transport program. And I keep your counsel from learning that you've been running independent operations that endangered Vreth personnel. You are negotiating from no leverage. I'm negotiating from complete leverage. You built 4 operations and tied them together so that stopping one risked the others. The problem with elegant architecture, Drake said, is that when one pillar fails, the whole thing shifts. 3 of your pillars are already gone. The 4th, that's leverage. Not mine, yours, over me. But it only works if you're willing to destroy the thing you built it to protect. Are you? Vren looked at him for a very long time. Ernest, beside Drake, very quietly ate another biscuit. The prisoner, Vren said at last, is of no further value to this operation. He looked at the logistics officer, said something in Vreth. The officer moved. The transport program, Drake said, will be reviewed, Vren said, at council level, where it will, I expect, be deemed to have exceeded its mandate. Not a withdrawal, a strategic retreat. Drake would take it. And in exchange, Vren said, and there was something in his voice now that Drake hadn't heard before. Not warmth, nothing so simple, but something like the recognition of one careful mind by another. You will not share your documentation with my counsel. I'll keep it, Drake said. Filed away as insurance. Insurance, Vren repeated. The word seemed to sit oddly in his mouth. A very human concept. Yes, Drake said. We have quite a few of those. They brought Ernest Penfold out an hour later, blinking in the amber light of the Vreth facility, wrapped in a thermal blanket that was several sizes too large, carrying inexplicably a Vreth issue ration container that he had apparently been using as a makeshift teapot. He saw Ernest Huxley and stopped. Hello, he said in a voice that had been through something and come out the other side still recognizably itself. Hello, Ernest Huxley said. He sounded like he was working very hard to keep his voice level. I did impressions, Penfold said, to pass the time. I'm afraid my alien captors didn't appreciate them. Your impressions are genuinely terrible, Ernest said. I know, I find them hilarious. Penfold looked at Drake. He had the face of a man who had been frightened for a long time and had simply decided to remain anyway, because what else was there? You came, he said. You stayed, Drake said. Seemed only fair. Penfold looked at the improvised teapot. I don't suppose there's a proper kitchen anywhere. The one at Baker Street has a camp stove, Ernest said. And I believe there are biscuits. That'll do, Penfold said. That'll do perfectly. They walked back through London in the small hours before dawn, three figures in an amber-lit city that wasn't theirs yet, but hadn't entirely stopped being. The patrol drones swept their 3-second arcs above the rooftops. The Vreth checkpoints glowed at the intersections. The signs were still down. But below a shuttered curry house on a street with no name, there was a camp stove, and a kettle, and a relay that still worked, and people who kept showing up. And somewhere in a Vreth command post built inside an old power station, a warlord who had designed 4 plagues to break the remnant of a species was sitting with the knowledge that one man, and a nervous comms officer, and a recovered prisoner who did bad impressions, had taken his elegant architecture apart and made it look like the most manageable thing in the world. 4 tasks. They just needed 4 tasks. Drake sat at the folding table in the kitchen with the exposed pipes, and Ernest put the kettle on, and Penfold did an impression of a Vreth guard that was almost aggressively inaccurate, and everyone found it hilarious anyway. Outside, the drone made its sweep, 3 seconds, same as always, but something had shifted. The way things shift when someone refuses, quietly and without ceremony, to stop showing up. Drake drank his tea while it was still hot. First time in months. He thought that counted for something. He thought that counted for quite a lot.